Ask yourself, have I ever made a snap judgment that I later regretted? If so, keep listening because this story might just change how you see your neighbors, your community, and even yourself. And once you reach the end, share this with a friend who needs a gentle reminder that assumptions can lead us astray. Asterisk. Karen Wilcox peered through a small gap in her living room curtains, breath catching in her throat. Something about the new neighbor across the street always made her uneasy. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but since he moved in last month, her radar for suspicious behavior had been on high alert. Every day, from the comfort of her aging recliner, Karen noted each car that pulled up to his driveway, each visitor that stayed past dark, and more recently, each construction delivery that deposited mysterious piles of lumber. That afternoon, the man, who she had finally learned was named Marcus Reed, seemed occupied with yet another project. Karen's breath quickened when she noticed him hammering tall wooden boards into place along the edges of his driveway. A fence, she realized, although it didn't look like a typical picket fence she was used to seeing in their suburban neighborhood. The boards were thick, dark-stained planks, already giving off a sense of imposing height. It appeared almost fortress-like in design. Karen found her heart pounding. Why does he need such a tall fence? She wondered, the question sounding accusatory, even in her own mind. Something in her gut told her it was more than just a decorative boundary. The creeping unease swelled, coiling around her common sense and strangling any attempt at rational thought. She fished her phone from the coffee table, lingering uncertainly. It wasn't the first time Karen had felt the pull to call the police for something she considered off. She'd done so in the past for late-night noise or when she spotted unfamiliar cars idling on the curb. The 911 dispatchers knew her voice, her address, and likely had an internal note about her jumpiness. Still, she convinced herself that it was better to call than regret not doing so later. With shaky fingers, Karen dialed 911. She explained to the dispatcher in a hushed tone what she saw. A man building a large fence for no apparent reason. "I'm not accusing him of a crime," she insisted, "but it's suspicious. He has heavy machinery out there. It's not normal for our neighborhood." The operator seemed unimpressed. "Ma'am, is he trespassing on your property or causing any immediate threat?" Karen hesitated. The answer was no. But instead of admitting she might be overreacting, she persisted. "No, not exactly. But trust me, something's not right. Maybe you could just send someone to check it out?" The dispatcher finally agreed, presumably more to appease the anxious caller than because of any real danger. When Karen hung up, she felt a mixture of triumph and guilt. She rationalized that perhaps she was doing the whole neighborhood a favor. She told herself that if there was a legitimate reason for that fence, the police would sort it out, and no one would get hurt. In the meantime, across the street, Marcus Reed set down his power drill and wiped the sweat from his brow. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not police officers. But as the cruiser rolled slowly down the road and stopped right in front of his newly purchased property, a heavy dread settled in his stomach. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered an uncomfortable situation in this neighborhood. 3 weeks earlier, a patrol car had shown up under the guise of a noise complaint, though all Marcus had been doing was quietly sanding a porch swing after 8 p.m. Marcus plastered on a polite smile as one of the officers stepped out. The officer approached cautiously, looking around at the stacked lumber and tools before making eye contact. "Afternoon, sir," the officer began. "We received a call about some suspicious activity. Mind telling me what you're building?" Marcus lowered his drill and gestured toward the upright boards. "I'm putting up a fence along the edge of my driveway. It's a personal project." "A fence? That's it." The disbelief in the officer's voice was clear. Marcus offered a nod. "Yeah, I have my reasons." He didn't elaborate, hoping the explanation would suffice. There was a pause, broken only by the crackle of the officer's radio. Another call was coming in, likely more urgent than the complaint about an innocent fence. The policeman looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, you're not doing anything illegal. You have a permit if it's over certain dimensions, right?" Marcus shook his head, producing the folded permit from his back pocket. "I cleared it with the city before I started. You could take a look." The officer glanced at the document and handed it back. "All right, then. You have a good day, Mr. Reed." Marcus watched the cruiser pull away, his shoulders tense. He shot a glance toward the row of houses across the street. Although curtains were drawn, a fleeting movement in one window caught his eye. So that's who called them, he thought. He'd seen her face in passing, a woman who always seemed to wear a pursed-lipped frown whenever they happened to cross paths. Turning back to his work, Marcus wondered if this was the new normal. Every time he tried to improve his property or invite a friend over, would he have to deal with unexpected scrutiny? He hammered another nail, focusing on the task. He had a timeline to meet, and no matter how many times the cops were called, he was going to see this fence project through. For Karen, watching the police leave without so much as a reprimand from Marcus was disappointing. She had expected some revelation that validated her concerns. Why else would he be building such a big fence? She fumed inwardly. He's up to something. She just knew it. Little did she know that Marcus's fence was more than just a barrier. It was the very foundation of a plan he'd had in mind from the moment he first laid eyes on that rundown property. And Karen? She had no idea that by calling the police, she'd set in motion a chain of events that would rattle both of their lives in ways neither could anticipate. The day after the police visit, Karen found herself checking her phone repeatedly for text messages from her neighbor group chat. She typed a quick message the night before. "Anyone see that tall fence going up at the Reed house? I called the cops. Something seems off." But the response was underwhelming. Most of the other neighbors were indifferent or offered gentle pushback. Anna, who lived 2 doors down from Marcus, wrote, "I met him. He's really nice. A veteran, actually." Karen scoffed at that, as if being nice to one neighbor guaranteed there was nothing sinister going on. Others chimed in about how good fences made good neighbors, some quoting the old proverb, "Better to be safe than sorry." Frustrated, Karen closed the chat. She couldn't shake the thought that she was the only one who truly understood how suspicious the whole situation was. She recalled the day Marcus moved in. A large moving truck had pulled up, and from her vantage point, she'd seen him lug a wooden trunk marked with military insignia. It looked heavy, perhaps filled with something dangerous. She had no proof, of course, but in her mind, it fit a pattern. A mysterious trunk, late-night projects, and now an imposing fence. While Karen stewed, Marcus continued to work on his driveway fence. Each day, he added new sections carefully measured, cut, and secured. By the end of the week, the structure was tall enough to cast a shadow across the sidewalk in the late afternoon. Local kids on bicycles would slow down to admire it, sometimes calling out a friendly, "Looking good, Mr. Reed." Marcus smiled back, noting how the kids seemed comfortable around him, unlike their parents, who often stuck to polite nods, or in Karen's case, watchful glares. Late Friday afternoon, just as Marcus was finishing the final panel, his friend Jerome arrived with a pickup truck full of materials: cinder blocks, a bag of cement mix, and a coil of heavy-duty wiring. Jerome hopped out, eyes bright with excitement. "You about ready for phase 2? He asked, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. Marcus grinned. "Absolutely. Let's get everything inside before the weekend is over." From her living room, Karen noticed the new delivery, this time cinder blocks, and her mind raced with possibilities. Walls. He's building walls. She whipped out her phone and typed another message to the neighbor group chat. "He's adding cement now. This is bigger than just a fence. I'm telling you, something is seriously off." A few minutes later, a neighbor named Don replied with a shrugging emoji and a single sentence. "He might just be improving his property, Karen." Enraged at the lack of concern, Karen slammed her phone down. Why doesn't anyone else see it? She had grown so certain that Marcus was planning something ominous. Her heart pounded with each day's construction progress. She started rummaging around her closet for an old pair of binoculars she'd once used to birdwatch. By early evening, Karen perched by her window, binoculars in hand, taking in the meticulously constructed fence that now encased most of Marcus's driveway. She watched as Marcus and Jerome hauled the cinder blocks inside the enclosure. They seemed to be laying them in a specific formation, but from her angle, she couldn't see precisely where. Occasionally, they consulted a clipboard. What could they possibly need cinder blocks for? Karen muttered to herself. She even tried to snap a few photos from her cell phone, though the glare of the setting sun made it difficult. Then she did something she'd never done before. She decided to sneak over to the property once it was dark. She wanted a closer look. Around 10 p.m., Karen pulled on a dark sweater and tiptoed across the street, sticking close to the hedges. Her heart thumped so loudly she was certain neighbors would hear it. Inside Marcus's fenced driveway, a single light glowed. The boards were spaced just wide enough that she could press her eye to the gap. She saw the cinder blocks in neat rows, the heavy-duty wiring running between them like some sort of grid. A faint humming sound emanated from what looked like a small generator. A generator? Why would he need one? She blinked, thoroughly perplexed. Suddenly, a deep voice from behind startled her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Karen spun around, heart in her throat, to face Jerome. He had walked around the side of the fence and nearly bumped into her. Even in the dim light, she could see his concerned expression. "Oh, I was just," Karen stammered. She felt the heat rising to her cheeks, mortified at being caught snooping. In a rush of panic, she concocted a flimsy excuse. "I thought I heard an animal crying." Jerome glanced around, genuinely worried. "An animal? I don't see anything. Maybe it was just the wind." Karen nodded stiffly, backing away. "Yes, maybe so. Sorry to bother you." Without waiting for a response, she practically sprinted across the street and back into her house. Her hands shook as she locked the front door. She felt foolish, but also more convinced than ever that something was being built behind that fence. Something requiring cinder blocks, wiring, and a generator. This is not normal home improvement, she thought, adrenaline coursing through her. What she couldn't figure out was the ultimate goal. Had he turned his garage into a workshop for some top-secret project? Was it a bunker? Some kind of underground vault? She tried to recall any local ordinance that might forbid such constructions, but nothing came to mind. As she paced her living room, she considered her options. Another call to 911 might result in an even more skeptical response, possibly even a warning for abusing emergency services. Yet the idea of waiting idly while Marcus continued his cryptic undertaking filled her with dread. She felt trapped. The creeping sense of doom that had begun with the fence boards now consumed her evening thoughts. Karen realized she needed more definitive proof, something concrete that could convince others to take her seriously. She had to show them she wasn't just a busybody, or worse, someone unfairly targeting a new neighbor for no good reason. But in the days to come, Karen would learn that the fence was only the first piece of Marcus's plan, and the cinder blocks were part of a blueprint more heartfelt, more personal, and far more significant than she could have possibly imagined. Over the next week, the neighborhood bustled with gossip. Kids returned to school, families prepared for the upcoming holiday season, and though Karen tried to rally attention about Marcus's mysterious project, most neighbors treated it as a mild curiosity at best. Word eventually reached Marcus that someone, though it wasn't hard to guess who, had been spreading rumors. He heard snippets from a few neighbors who brought it up in conversation. Anna from 2 doors down gently asked him, "Is everything okay? Karen's been hinting that you might be building a bunker or something." Marcus let out a long sigh, but forced a reassuring smile. "I'm not building a bunker. Trust me on that." Anna laughed apologetically. "I figured it was just her imagination running wild. She tends to worry." Marcus nodded politely. He didn't want to fan the flames of any conflict. His late wife, Cynthia, used to say, "A smile and a calm explanation can soften even the hardest hearts." He tried to channel that wisdom now, even though it felt like the conflict had grown beyond a misunderstanding. Inside the driveway enclosure, progress continued. With Jerome's help, Marcus had arranged the cinder blocks and installed wiring to shape a raised platform. They poured concrete to secure it. While the specifics remained hidden behind the fence, passers-by could hear the hum of electric tools and catch glimpses of lights flickering at odd hours. One afternoon, Karen decided to intercept the mail carrier, who was pushing a cart along the sidewalk. "Hello, Laura," she greeted, putting on her most pleasant voice. "Have you been delivering a lot of packages over there?" She gestured to Marcus's house. Laura, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, shrugged. "He's received a few deliveries, some heavy boxes. Construction stuff, I think." Karen latched onto this. "Any idea what's in those boxes? Could they be dangerous?" Laura gave her a skeptical look. "Karen, I can't open people's mail. And from the outside, they just look like home improvement supplies. Anything else you need?" Flustered, Karen shook her head. No, that's all, she muttered, watching Laura continue her route. Realizing she was getting nowhere with the neighbors or the mail carrier, Karen decided to dig up Marcus's background. She spent hours searching online. She discovered that Marcus Reed was a retired engineer, a veteran of the U.S. Navy, and had recently purchased the property after it had sat vacant for a year. She couldn't find any signs of criminal history or shady dealings, nothing to confirm her suspicions. Still, she refused to let it rest. As the days wore on, the fence now fully surrounded Marcus's driveway, and the interior project was nearing completion. Finally, one Sunday morning, while she was pruning her rose bushes, Karen heard the unmistakable sound of power tools shutting off and the quiet hush of a generator being turned down. She peeked through the slats of her fence. That was when she saw Marcus walk out of his enclosure, lock it up with a padlock, and toss the key into his pocket. He looked both exhausted and satisfied, the way someone might look after finishing a monumental task. Curiosity warred with Karen's sense of decorum. She knew better than to sneak around in broad daylight, so she waited until late that night, heart pounding, to make another attempt at looking inside. Unlike before, the enclosure had no open gaps. Marcus had sealed up every single slot between the boards with wooden strips, clearly intending to keep prying eyes out. Her frustration mounted. That's when she noticed the small gate at the back of the fence. It had a combination lock rather than a padlock. A dangerous idea flickered across her mind. What if I try to guess the combination? She felt ridiculous even considering it. Breaking and entering wasn't exactly a step she ever thought she'd take. But the thought of letting some potential threat loom made her chest tighten. Just as she rested her hand on the lock, footsteps echoed across the pavement. Karen froze. She held her breath, ducking behind a bush. Over the fence, she heard a muffled conversation. Marcus's voice and another person's, possibly Jerome. All set? Jerome asked. Marcus exhaled loudly. All set. This is going to be something special. Exactly what Cynthia would have wanted. Karen's ears perked up. She remembered overhearing from a neighbor that Marcus's wife had passed away last year. What does Cynthia have to do with all this? She listened closely, but they spoke softly now, and their voices faded as they moved toward Marcus's backyard. Slipping away, Karen's mind raced. The mention of his deceased wife stirred something in her. She felt an unexpected pang of remorse, recalling how the neighbor group chat had mentioned he was a widower. Karen thought of her own late husband, Greg. He'd passed away nearly 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. In the days following his death, she remembered how she'd thrown herself into house projects, clinging to tasks as a way to cope with the vast emptiness that threatened to swallow her. That memory pierced her resolute suspicion like a needle, letting out some of the pressure. Could it be that Marcus is working through his grief, too? She wondered. Maybe the fence is part of a memorial or something personal. But she shook the thought off almost as soon as it came. It wasn't enough to quell her anxiety. The cinder blocks and wiring still screamed something clandestine. Besides, if it was a memorial, why the secrecy? Why the locked fence and the furtive late-night work? Over the following days, Karen grew restless. She paced her house, rechecking her online searches, and occasionally hovered near her window, binoculars in hand, even though the fence now blocked most of the view. Each time, she was struck by the same question. What on earth is he building back there? As word spread that the project was almost done, a subtle excitement began circulating. A few neighbors chatted about a possible reveal. Maybe it was a unique garage or an elaborate deck for entertaining. Some proposed an art installation, remembering that Marcus had a creative streak. But only Karen, with her hammering suspicion, seemed convinced it was something darker. Yet no matter how far her mind spun stories of suspicious activity, a small voice within her began to ask, what if I'm wrong? That question unsettled her even more, because if she was wrong, that meant she had escalated tensions, involved the police, and essentially harassed a grieving man for no reason. Time would soon tell. Marcus's plan neared completion, and Karen was about to get an eye-opening invitation she never expected. The big day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. Karen woke to find a simple white envelope slipped under her front door. Inside was an elegantly printed invitation. "You're cordially invited to the unveiling in memory of Cynthia Reed, and to celebrate the grand opening of our neighborhood Veterans Community Workshop. Please join us at Marcus Reed's driveway enclosure at 2 p.m. today." Karen's hand trembled as she read it. A community workshop? She blinked in disbelief. Was this some kind of trick? She immediately glanced at her phone. The neighbor group chat was buzzing with excitement. Anna had posted, "Did everyone get the invite? This is so amazing. He's dedicating something in memory of his wife." A mix of relief and shame washed over Karen as she flipped the invitation over, half expecting to find more details. The back was blank. Is this really what he's been building all along? She thought, her guilt growing. She recalled overhearing the reference to Cynthia, and how she had told herself it could be a memorial. But she'd pushed that possibility aside, too wrapped up in her own fears. By 1:45 p.m., a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk outside Marcus's tall fence. Karen was among them, feeling strangely out of place. The sun illuminated the structure, highlighting the fine craftsmanship. Now that she was seeing it up close without suspicion, she had to admit the fence was beautiful. Perfectly aligned, dark-stained wood that exuded care and intention. Marcus emerged at 2 p.m. sharp, wearing a clean button-down shirt and a humble smile. He addressed the neighbors who'd gathered. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "As some of you know, Cynthia, my late wife, was passionate about supporting veterans and their families. We dreamed of creating a safe space where folks could learn woodworking, metalworking, and other trades, especially those struggling to adjust back to civilian life." He gestured toward the large locked gate. "With the help of my buddy Jerome and a few others, I've turned my driveway into a fully equipped mini workshop. Everything is enclosed for safety, security, and to protect the tools from weather. The reason it's so tall is to prevent noise from bothering neighbors and to ensure a controlled environment for those who might suffer from post-traumatic stress." A murmur of approval passed through the group. Karen looked down, her face burning. Marcus continued, "This was Cynthia's dream, and today, I'm proud to make it real. Every few Saturdays, we'll hold free classes for veterans, active duty personnel, and anyone else in the neighborhood who wants to learn a skill or simply lend a hand. We'll be making crafts, custom furniture, and hopefully forging new friendships. All proceeds from anything we sell will go to veterans' charities." He then motioned toward the gate. "Shall we step inside?" The moment Marcus swung the gate open, jaws dropped. The cinder block platform Karen had seen was actually the foundation for heavy-duty woodworking benches, each equipped with clamps and storage underneath. The wiring powered overhead lights, fans, and outlets for power tools. There was a neat row of handcrafted wooden stools arranged around each workstation. A corner of the workshop held a small generator for backup power. Photos of Cynthia hung along one side of the fence. Pictures of her smiling in uniform, some of her receiving awards for community service. Marcus walked over and gently touched one of the photos, his eyes glistening. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Anna softly said, "This is beautiful, Marcus." A few people took out their phones to snap pictures. Some neighbors shook his hand, congratulating him on such a thoughtful addition to the community. Someone offered a tearful hug, moved by the dedication to Cynthia's memory. Karen lingered at the back of the group, unsure whether she was even welcome. A pang of regret twisted in her chest, remembering the phone calls, the group chat messages, the suspicion. Just then, Marcus turned and spotted her. Their eyes met. She forced a small smile, stepping forward. "Marcus, I didn't realize—" Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. I judged you without—" He raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "Thank you for coming. I appreciate it." He offered no further condemnation, but in that brief moment, Karen felt both relieved and deeply ashamed. Others stepped forward with questions about how the workshop would be run, whether there would be sign-up sheets, or if any local veterans organizations were sponsoring it. Marcus answered with warmth and openness, inviting everyone to contribute ideas. As the crowd thinned out, Karen wandered around the workshop, examining the tools. They were neatly arranged on pegboards, saws, sanders, drills, all labeled and color-coded. She noticed a framed letter on a workbench, presumably from Cynthia to Marcus. She didn't read it in detail, not wanting to intrude on his private memories. But a single line, highlighted with a yellow marker, caught her eye. Continue to build, my love. Build something that lasts. Her throat tightened. She realized in that moment that all her worst fears had been groundless illusions. In truth, Marcus had built exactly what Cynthia's letter had asked, a sanctuary for healing and creation. Marcus approached, his expression tentative but kind. You can come by if you ever want to see how things work here. We'll be hosting an open house next weekend. You're welcome to join. Karen nodded, fighting back tears. I'd like that, she said softly, aware that this was more than an invitation to a workshop. It was an invitation to understand, to connect. As she made her way to the gate, she paused to glance back at the large fence. The very barrier that once symbolized secrecy and danger now stood as a testament to craftsmanship, respect, and community. It was